Paddy Moriarty was born in Ireland but moved to Australia in 1966 at the age of 19. In 2005, he made his final move to the remote outback town of Laramie. Counting Paddy, Laramie had 11 residents. It sits along the Stuart Highway some 300 miles south of Darwin. On the evening of December 16, 2017, Paddy was where he could usually be found, the pub at the Pink Panther Hotel. He was of course joined by his constant companion, his red Kelpie dog Kelly. Paddy had almost always had a dog, but Kelly was new to him, being only a year old. Paddy would habitually have 8 beers a night, and sometimes more if he were having a good time. Around sundown that night, he left for home. A tourist on his way through town gave Paddy what was left of a store-bought rotisserie chicken so that he could give it to Kelly as a treat. Paddy and Kelly were never seen again. The police were called 72 hours after Paddy was last seen by Barry Sharp, the publican at the Pink Panther, who grew worried after Paddy failed to maintain his usual routine. All clues seem to indicate that Paddy made it home on the night of the 16th but did not stay there. The date-stamped chicken wrapper from the tourist was found inside the microwave of Paddy's home across the Stuart Highway from the Pink Panther Hotel. There were no signs of struggle in the home. But police found Paddy's eyeglasses and hat, which he was rarely ever seen without due to his baldness, left in the house. Paddy's calendar, which was from 2016 but had 2017 dates handwritten into the boxes, showed that the last day crossed off was December 15th, the day before he was last seen. As though Paddy did not finish the night of the 16th at home. The remote and dangerous landscape could have played a part in Paddy and Kelly going missing. Everything from sinkholes to wild boars could conceivably have played a part in the case. However, the tense social situation in the tiny town could also have been the cause of the mystery. The handful of residents in Laramie had once been very close. However, over the years, seemingly petty concerns had divided the town. A tea house owned by friend Hodgett sold, among other things, homemade meat pies. At some point, the Pink Panther Hotel also began selling them. The competition in the small town was controversial, and Paddy, a fixture at his beloved Pink Panther, was quick to tell tourists that Fran's pies were inferior. Fran, whose home and business were almost directly across the highway from Paddy's home, of course did not appreciate this. Rumors eventually began spreading throughout the town about Fran's quality of ingredients, and the camaraderie between the townspeople quickly deteriorated. There were of course probably other issues at play in the town, but the residents of Laramie have been far more reluctant to speak publicly about them. Fran has alleged that Paddy did everything from trying to poison her patrons to throwing a dead kangaroo onto her property. She was reported to have said that she wanted to kill Paddy, but she maintains that she only made that statement as an expression to indicate her frustration with him. Fran's gardener, who also lived on the property, Owen Laurie, has also been looked on with suspicion in Laramie, but his relatively recent arrival in town may also be a cause for that. On the night Paddy was last seen, Owen attempted to make 2 phone calls, neither of which connected from a public phone booth outside Fran's property at approximately the time Paddy would have been going by on his way home from the pub. That the calls play into Paddy's disappearance. All 10 remaining residents of Laramie have been interviewed by police, and all 10 have denied involvement in the disappearance of Paddy and Kelly. Almost all of them were also called to give evidence at a coroner's inquest into Paddy's presumed death in June 2018. The inquest was halted despite only being partially heard, hoping that Kelly may have been dropped off at one and provide them with a lead, but have had no success. In October 2018, Barry Sharp was forced to put the Pink Panther Hotel up for auction when he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer and could no longer handle the work of running the establishment. Police continue to investigate Paddy's case as an unsolved homicide. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Christina Voltaire's life was a string of challenges that she worked hard to overcome. Born in Haiti, Christina was separated from her father at age 11 when he was able to emigrate to the United States. She was reunited with him when she too was able to emigrate as a teenager, but this meant being away from her mother and siblings back in Haiti. Christina planned to remedy this challenge by getting an education and earning a good enough living to bring the rest of her family to the United States. At the beginning of 2011, Christina was close to completing the first part of that goal. A student in nuclear medicine at Kaiser University, Christina had completed most of the coursework she needed for her degree. She was living alone in an apartment in the Berkshire apartment complex in Winter Haven, Florida. Christina was also still coping with another hardship in her life. She was weeks away from the one-year anniversary of the death of her infant daughter. The medical examiner was never able to identify a cause of death for baby Audrey. Those close to Christina say that while she had been devastated by Audrey's death, she was coping with the loss as well as could be expected. The last place Christina was publicly seen was at an IHOP at 11:30 in the morning. She had a leisurely meal and told a former coworker who was working at the restaurant that she was feeling ill. She called to postpone a hair appointment before heading home to rest. At approximately 7 p.m. that night, Christina had a knock on her door. It was her friend and neighbor, Charles Pierre Gill. Charles's car had broken down while he was driving home. He walked back to their apartment complex to call his mechanic and wanted to borrow Christina's tan Hyundai Elantra to drive back to his disabled vehicle and look it over with his mechanic. According to Charles, Christina was still not feeling well. She was dressed in a black robe and drinking a cup of tea. She was trying to complete some studying. Christina gave Charles her set of keys and he locked the door of her apartment as he went out to get her car. He drove back to his own car where the mechanic gave him bad news about the state of his engine. Charles then drove to his mother's house to pick up 2 plates of food. He then drove back to his apartment complex and went to Christina's unit to return her keys. When Charles entered the apartment, just 45 minutes after he had left, Christina was gone. The black robe she'd been wearing was laying on her bed. There were no signs of struggle in the apartment. Christina's purse and laptop were still there. Without her car, she had no way of getting very far on her own. When Christina did not come back home, Charles called the police. Christina's relationships with both Charles and his brother, Dussel, have been areas of interest in Christina's sudden disappearance. According to Charles, he and Christina were just good friends and were never romantically involved. Christina had, however, been romantically involved with Dussel. Dussel had believed that Christina's daughter Audrey had been his daughter as well. He had been trying to file an insurance claim for the costs of her funeral. To do so, he needed to provide her birth certificate. When he looked at it, he found out that Christina had listed another man as the child's father. While this might have made some men angry, Dussel claims that it only left him disappointed. Because Christina was still so upset about Audrey's death, he did not want to fight with her over not being Audrey's biological father, so he calmly ended their relationship. Christina's father, however, paints a very different picture of Christina's relationship with both of the brothers. He claims that Christina was in fact romantically involved with Charles. He further alleges that Doucette had been hostile towards Christina in recent months because of this relationship. He claims to have received a phone call at 1 a.m. a few months before Christina went missing, in which his daughter told him that Doucette had been physically aggressive towards her, although he had been acquitted on that charge. Some of Christina's actions do seem to indicate that she feared for her physical safety. On the morning of the day she disappeared, Christina visited the management office of her apartment complex and asked to have her locks changed. A work order was put in, but the locks were not changed that day. Both Charles and Dussel claimed that they did not have keys to the apartment, although Charles did have Christina's key. When he came back to drop off her car keys, Christina never spoke to anyone, including her father, about why she wanted the locks changed. According to Dussel, he had been in Fort Lauderdale, a more than 3-hour drive from Winter Haven, when Christina vanished. He had left Winter Haven at approximately noon on January 8th to make the drive. He was in Fort Lauderdale to see his girlfriend, who had recently given birth to the couple's daughter. Doucette said in an immediate interview about a month after Christina was last seen that ATM and cell records should confirm his alibi. The quality of the surveillance tapes Winter Haven police first received from Fort Lauderdale was not high enough to identify Doucette on them. However, police did eventually receive enough evidence to corroborate Doucette's alibi. If she is still alive, Christina will turn 31 in August 2019. Michelle Geline Lakey, who preferred to be called by her middle name, was 11 years old in 1986. She and her family lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Her family consisted of her mother and 3 other siblings. Her parents were estranged and she had not spoken to her father in 3 years. On August 26th, she went to visit her mother, Lois Dunham, in Mercy Hospital, a facility now called the Regional Hospital of Scranton. Since her mother was in the hospital, she planned to spend the night with a friend. Before heading to that friend's house, however, Jolene had to walk home from the hospital. The walk should have only taken 15 minutes. She was seen walking on North Washington Avenue, the street where she lived. However, she never made it to her home in its 1300 block. Jolene seemingly vanished into thin air and broad daylight. A massive effort was launched by the local community to cover Scranton in posters with Jolene's picture. The effort brought forth an unconfirmed sighting of Jolene getting into a light yellow vehicle just a block away from her home. This sighting would become relevant a few years later when police finally had a person of interest in Jolene's case. Frank Osolani is currently serving a life sentence for the 1989 rape and murder of 9-year-old Renee Waddle. At his trial in 1990, police received a tip that Osolani had been seen with a young girl at Lake Wall in Pawpuck, roughly 30 miles east of Scranton, around the time Jolene disappeared. The idea that the young girl could have been Jolene is strengthened by the fact that Jolene knew Osolani. Jolene was known to visit the auto repair shop Osolani owned to play with his dog, but his line of work gave him access to numerous vehicles at any one time. When interviewed about Jolene, Osolani admitted knowing her, and he even claimed he gave the little girl rides on occasion but denied any involvement in her disappearance. Police have not been able to find evidence firmly connecting him to the case. Jolene's mother moved her family out of Scranton and into New York State and ultimately Rhode Island after Jolene went missing. But she and Jolene's siblings regularly returned to Scranton in August. They walked the route Jolene took from the hospital that day and symbolically complete the walk home she was not able to finish in 1986. A kiosk displaying Jolene's full name now stands in Courthouse Square in Scranton, displaying information about other missing children in hopes that Jolene can help bring other kids home. Joan Lawrence was born in Ottawa, Ontario in 1921. As an adult, she worked as a copy editor for a Toronto newspaper and became a published poet. In the early 1960s, she moved to Huntsville in Ontario's Muskoka region. Muskoka is a popular vacation destination due to its many lakes and natural beauty. It was around this time that Joan began fostering abandoned litters of kittens. For the rest of her life, she would affectionately be referred to as the Cat Lady on account of her love for the animals and the care she provided for them. By the mid-1990s, she had approximately 30 cats under her care. It was around this time that Joan's life became intertwined with the Land family. The Lands were outwardly a large, God-fearing Seventh-day Adventist family. Several members of the family, however, had extensive criminal records. Most of these family members were heavily involved in the family businesses started in the early 1990s. The Land family began a string of Christian retirement homes that claimed to provide a full range of care services for a reasonable price in a home-like setting. In actuality, the homes were overcrowded and in poor shape. Residents slept on mattresses on the floor and were served cheap meals of rice, pasta, or macaroni and cheese. Not all of the homes had shower or toilet facilities. The majority of the residents of the Land's homes had no family to notice and object to this kind of treatment. The Lands trolled Toronto homeless shelters for new residents, telling vulnerable and lonely senior citizens that they could be cared for in the picturesque woods of cottage country in exchange for their monthly government pension check. The home Joan lived in was not technically a retirement home that claimed to provide care for his residents. Rather, it was more like an affiliated rental property for the elderly. Refusing to be separated from the cats she so loved, Joan had to live in a dilapidated shack behind the main house. The shack had no insulation, heat, running water, or electricity. For these terrible accommodations, the Lands took almost $700 a month from Joan in rent. That amount was almost the entirety of Joan's monthly government check. The two members of the Lawn family Joan interacted with the most were David Lawn, her landlord, and his uncle, Von Allen, who ostensibly was the handyman for the property. David would often give Joan a ride into town. On the days he didn't, she would walk the 8 miles so that she could buy food for her cats and take advantage of the free coffee at a local shop. She was well known to the people in town. In October 1998, however, Joan stopped coming into town. After a few weeks, the Ontario Provincial Police were called to investigate her disappearance. Around the time she went missing, Joan had been complaining to her friends in town that she had not received her much-needed income tax check. She had a friend who worked in a law office look into the matter just prior to her disappearance. The check had, in fact, been issued and arrived. After Joan confronted him twice, Ron Allen admitted that he had forged Joan's signature and cashed her check. Joan's bank account turned out to be a joint account shared with David Lon. Joan did not have a bank card, but David Lon did have one for the account. The bank card was used 6 times after Joan had last been seen. Ron Allen, despite seeing Joan almost every day prior to her disappearance, never reported her missing once he stopped seeing her. David Lon initially told authorities that he had no idea what happened to Joan. In subsequent conversations, he gave outlander stories about Joan going into hiding from the police or being on a trip to New York or Hawaii or some other destination that Joan clearly could not afford to travel to. According to Joan's friends, she would never have abandoned her cats, even if she did have the financial means to leave the area on her own. During a search of Joan's shack in December 1998, police located the remains of several of Joan's cats. They had been shot. Joan was not the only resident of one of the land's retirement homes to go missing. John Semple, John Crafts, and Ralph Grant were all also residents in the homes who mysteriously went missing between 1998 and 1999. The Lands never reported any of the men missing either. In an investigation into the 3 missing men's finances, it was discovered that the Lands had stolen tens of thousands of dollars on their retirement benefits and committed fraud by cashing their checks after they had gone missing. Various members of the Land family who worked for the retirement homes received either short conditional sentences or probation for the financial crimes. None of them ever actually spent time in prison. No one has ever been charged in relation to the men's disappearances. David Lon and Ron Allen were never convicted of any crime in relation to their financial dealings with Joan or her forged tax check. Joan remains missing but feared dead. On paper, Samuel Todd seemed like someone with a clear path in life. He came from a long line on both sides of his family of people who were dedicated to both religious life and social justice. His father was a Presbyterian minister and the former director for urban mission at the World Council of Churches. His mother had taken Sam and his 3 brothers to celebrate the first Earth Day and protests against the Vietnam War. Sam entered his father's alma mater, Yale Divinity School, in 1981 after an undergraduate career at Vassar, full of volunteer work concerned with bettering the lives of those in the inner city and in third world countries, the same concentration his father's interests had. In actuality, Sam's life was somewhat chaotic. His father's career and his own desire to help others had led him to live in Asia, Europe, Africa, and all over the United States. According to one of his former roommates, he never even bothered to unpack when he moved into their dorm room, seeming to always be prepared for his inevitable next move. When he entered Yale Divinity, his plan was to pursue an academic degree rather than a ministerial one like his father before him and eventually become a professor of religious studies. By his final year at Yale, however, he seemed to have turned to the pastoral path taken by his father and grandfather. In the fall of 1983, he passed the first set of the Presbyterian Church's ordination exams. His academic performance in his Yale classes were far more spotty, however, and it was not certain that he would graduate in the spring of 1984 as scheduled. Sam had an aunt who was willing to help cover the costs of his education, but he did not always take advantage of this. Sam largely struggled to cover his bills from Yale and his rent payments with the funds from his part-time $4 an hour job. With all these struggles and internal conflicts, it is understandable that Sam decided to blow off some steam by having a festive New Year's Eve. He was scheduled to leave for a religious conference with his parents on January 1st, 1984. He decided to spend New Year's Eve in New York City with his brother Adam. Adam, Sam, and their group of friends spent the evening party hopping in Lower Manhattan. They ended up at a party at 271 Mulberry Street. By 1:30 a.m. on January 1st, Sam, who had been drinking both beer and vodka, was visibly drunk and unstable. Adam suggested that the two of them go outside to sober up in the frigid January air, so Sam stumbled downstairs with him. Sam, still not feeling better, told his brother that he was going to run around the block. Adam watched his brother jog towards Houston Street. He would be the last person to see Sam. Adam was uneasy about leaving Sam alone outside almost as soon as he came back inside. When Sam did not return to the party after a few minutes, Adam began a search that would escalate throughout the next hours and days. Adam and a group of friends began searching the streets and nearby parties. At 4:30 a.m., Adam called his oldest brother, John, who drove in from New Jersey, and helped Adam search hospitals. At 11 a.m., they went to the police to file New York City's first missing persons report of 1984. The volunteer search for Sam was massive. Its headquarters were set up in a Greenwich Village church and headed by Sam's brother. More than 20,000 flyers were plastered all over New York by friends of Sam who came from all over the country to aid in the search. By the end of January, over half of Yale Divinity School's 400 students had volunteered for the cause in one capacity or another. The initial concern following Sam's disappearance was that he could have been involved in some sort of accident. He had been intoxicated and could have fallen and injured himself. New York had been filled with partygoers on the night he went missing, and many of them had been drinking as well. Another intoxicated person could have hit him with a car or started a fight with him that ended in his death. Sam was never brought to a hospital and his body was never found, leaving these theories unproven. Another popular theory was that Sam decided to leave his life behind and go live amongst the homeless people he had spent so much of his life trying to help. Volunteers searched homeless shelters and soup kitchens for him but never found him there. While theories in Sam's case abound, solid answers still remain scarce and Sam has never been located. Oscoda is a small town in northeast Michigan that lies along Lake Huron. On Halloween of 1969, the Lowell High School was set to have its homecoming football game. The game briefly had to be evacuated due to a bomb threat. No bomb was found and no one was hurt. Unfortunately, that incident would not prove to be the biggest story of the night. That night, the three youngest daughters in the Hobley family returned home after trick-or-treating with their mother. Had plans to go to the homecoming game at the high school and then meet her boyfriend at a Halloween party. Pamela was not home and there was no sign that she had been home while her family had been out trick-or-treating. As the night went on, Pamela's mother began to worry. Pamela's boyfriend told them that she had never shown up to meet him at the party. As Pamela's worried mother began to call around to try to locate her 15-year-old daughter, she learned that she was not the only concerned parent in town that night. 16-year-old Patricia Spencer was also missing. Pamela and Patricia attended the same school and were acquaintances, but they were not known to be close friends or to spend time together alone. However, for some reason, they skipped part of school together on the day of Halloween. They were seen walking along River Road together and then seemed to disappear into thin air. The ongoing investigation into the girls' disappearance has been hampered by the fact that it was not taken seriously. When it occurred, authorities dismissed Patty and Pam as runaways and failed to follow up on potential leads. In May of 2013, a man reported to police that he had picked up the two girls along River Road the day they went missing and dropped them off at a gas station near the intersection of River Road and Route 23. This made him the last known person to see them. When asked why he did not report this in 1969, he told the police that he had. The man had come forward and been interviewed by the police on November 1st, the day after the girls went missing. Officers working on the case did not bother to even report the man's existence in the case's file. It is impossible to know how many other leads may have been received but ignored. While both girls had a reputation for partying, they had no reason to leave their home. Despite her young age, Pamela had recently become engaged to her boyfriend, so she had every reason to stay in Escoda. Pamela's sister Mary is adamant that her sister and Patricia were picked up by the wrong person on Halloween of 1969 and met with foul play. She's also adamant that if the police had done their job correctly, both families would know what happened to their missing girls. Mary continues to return to her hometown every few months to hang new flyers bearing her sister's image and asking for information. 30-year-old Sylvia Salinas owned a small grocery store at the intersection of 31st Street and Avenue Q in Galveston, Texas. On October 31, 1989, a silent alarm in the store triggered a phone call to 911. Police responded within minutes. Upon entering the small store, they saw bloody footprints on the floor. Behind the counter was Sylvia's body. Her killer was already gone. Sylvia had been stabbed in the heart with a large knife. The killer then used the murder weapon to pry open the cash register and steal all the cash out of it. This was what had set off the silent alarm. While the motive for the crime appears to be robbery, authorities believe that Sylvia knew her killer. She had no defensive wounds. She kept a gun and a machete behind the register to protect herself, but made no effort to grab either of them. Her killer was able to get close enough to stab her without scaring her. According to her family, Sylvia would not let anyone behind the counter unless she knew them well and trusted them. After the murder, approximately 20 different men were interviewed and provided statements and fingerprints to the police. They were all cleared. In 2008, Hurricane Ike destroyed all the stored evidence in Sylvia's case, except for a videotape taken at the scene. Luckily, fingerprints taken at the time of the murder were entered into a database and are available for comparison. In 2018, Galveston police announced plans to resubmit them. For now, Sylvia's case still remains unsolved. Doris and Alan Sorensen lived in Windsor, a small town in northern Colorado. The couple ran a jewelry store on Main Street. Doris, 66, ran the counter of the store while her husband, Alan, 79, mainly did repairs and engraving. On November 5, 1984, a friend of the Sorensens called the police out of concern for their safety. Neither of the Sorensens had been seen or heard from since Halloween, and newspapers were piling up at their front door. Police Chief John Michaels, the town's main investigator, took the call and agreed to go out to the Sorensen home. He was able to gain entry to the house through the back garage door. At 10:45 a.m., he discovered the bodies of Doris and Alan inside their brick home. The couple's beloved dog had also been killed. Chief Michaels found Doris in an upstairs bedroom and Alan was found downstairs. They had both been bound and strangled. Authorities determined that Alan and Doris had been killed on Halloween, the day they had last been seen. While the Sorensens were pleasant people who were kind and welcoming to others, they were also very private people. They interacted with the public only at their store, not attending parties or community functions. They left their house dark every Halloween to let trick-or-treaters know not to come to their house. This unfortunately meant that no one was near their home on the night of Halloween, giving the couple's killer the opportunity to not be detected. A year prior to their deaths, potentially down to the day, Alan and Doris were the victims of a burglary. Either late at night on October 30th or in the early hours of October 31st, 1983, a hole was cut in the roof of the Sorensen jewelry store. Thieves stole over $27,000 worth of gold and loose jewels. The vast majority of the stolen property was recovered several months later. In February of 1984, 7 people were arrested in connection with the crime. 3 men were convicted in the burglary. However, they were all in custody at the time of the Sorensens' murders. Police will not confirm if anything was taken from the Sorensen home at the time of the murder, but they have stated that nothing was removed from the jewelry store that night. According to a friend of the Sorensens, Doris and Alan potentially took cash and loose diamonds home with them at night. This means that robbery could still potentially be a motive in this case, even though it cannot be known to the public. The case went cold very quickly, despite Chief Michaels working 16-hour days and traveling to different states to follow up on even the flimsiest of leads. Police have investigated persons of interest, but there have never been any real suspects in the case. As of 2018, the case is considered open but inactive. Roberta Miller, known affectionately as Bobby, lived a life full of family and activity. She had 6 siblings and raised 2 children of her own. She had recently finalized her divorce from her husband, Gary Miller. She had previously worked at her husband's car dealership but was now working in real estate following her divorce. She had also decided to go back to school and study business. The Guilford, New Hampshire resident loved crafts and hiking on nearby Mount Major. She spent Halloween of 2010 at a hardware store shopping for supplies to make new flower boxes for her living room windows. The rich life a 54-year-old built was tragically cut short, however, when she was killed inside her home on the evening of October 31st. Bobby's body was discovered by her adult son, Jonathan, the following day. She had been shot multiple times. Bobby's yellow lab, named Sport, had also been killed by several gunshots. Police found no signs of forced entry. Bobby's family rented a billboard on Route 104 in Meredith, New Hampshire, to ask for information and offer a reward in Bobby's case. The billboard is yet to generate an answer to the mystery of Bobby's murder, but in 2018 it did generate controversy. The usual message was briefly covered with a new sign questioning whether or not Bobby's son, Jonathan, was cooperating fully with the investigation into his mother's death. Jonathan has always maintained that he had nothing to do with his mother's death. He accuses his uncle Ken of putting up the billboard, citing long-standing tension between the two of them. Ken has never confirmed if he was indeed the person who changed the billboard. The tensions within Bobby's family aside, they continue to fight to find out who took her life on Halloween of 2010. In In 1983, 28-year-old Nancy Penner lived in Paradise, California with her boyfriend, Jeff Jeffries, and her 2 children. 4-year-old Omar was from a previous relationship and infant Yana was Jeff's daughter. On Halloween night, Nancy was invited to celebrate at a friend's Halloween party. She never made it to the party. October 31st will be the last time anyone had contact with Nancy. When Nancy's brother tried to invite her to Thanksgiving dinner and could not contact her, he began to worry. He filed a missing persons report for her on December 19th. 3 days later, when he should have been celebrating Nancy's 29th birthday, Jeff Jeffries left California and flew to Hawaii with Nancy's 2 children. He eventually returned to the mainland United States, leaving Omar in California and dropping Yana off with his stepsister in Iowa. Jeff committed suicide in 1986. Omar was eventually adopted and changed his name to Daniel. In 2010, while acting in the play Masquerade at the Moulin Rouge, Daniel suffered what he described as a meltdown and began attending therapy. Coincidentally, he was in the process of transitioning back to using his birth name at this time. During therapy, Omar began remembering upsetting details from his early life. He remembered hearing Yana crying and seeing Jeff with his hand behind the toilet in the family bathroom. He remembered Jeff shooting and his mother running out of the house clutching her arm. This was the last memory he had of his mother. Police investigating the original missing persons report on Nancy did discover a bullet lodged in the bathroom cabinet of her home, corroborating Omar's recollection. It is unclear if this memory of Omar's is from the night Nancy went missing or some time previous to it. The most obvious assumption to make is that Jeff chased Nancy from the house and killed her. Jeff reportedly owned property in rural Butte County, leading to speculation that he could have disposed of Nancy's body there. Unless Nancy's remains are found, however, it cannot even be said for sure if she is deceased. Furthermore, Nancy and Jeff grew pot at their home. If Nancy had been shot accidentally in a scuffle or Jeff had to shoot her in self-defense, Jeff may not have wanted to alert the police. If Nancy did die on Halloween in 1983, it was not necessarily murder. Without Jeff Jeffries, even if Nancy's remains are found, the exact circumstances of her death may never be fully understood. Omar reconnected with his half-sister, Yana, in the 1990s. He has submitted a DNA sample to the police to hopefully help in Nancy's case. In 2010, he was finally able to locate and contact his birth father, Nancy's high school sweetheart. Michael Van Zandt hailed from Michigan but traveled much of the world as a member of the United States Air Force. He met his future wife at a base in Japan and served 2 tours in Iraq. He and his wife had 3 children together, and everyone who knew him described him as a wonderful father. After 12 years in the service, he left active duty but got a civilian job at Edwards Air Force Base in California training security personnel. Michael and his wife decided to amicably end their marriage. They maintained a good relationship and Michael remained active in his children's lives. Michael learned to live on his own and enter back into the dating scene. In 2016, he was approved for a mortgage to buy a house and looked forward to making a better home for his children than the apartment he had been renting. On March 5, 2016, Michael drove to Hermosa Beach, California, approximately 2 hours away from his home in Lancaster. He had been invited by a friend from work to go out that weekend with a group of her friends and watch a televised mixed martial arts fight. After watching the match, the group decided to start bar hopping along Hermosa Beach's Pier Plaza. At 10:15, the group was waiting outside in line to get into a bar called American Junkie. Michael told the group that he was going to go to the liquor store next door to use the bathroom while they waited. He would never meet back up with the group. Michael's friends tried calling him throughout the night, but the calls went to voicemail. He did not respond to any texts. They continued to bar hop along Pier Plaza before heading back to their hotel. Michael's vehicle was still parked there. It was also still there the following morning. Michael's friends returned home, still unsure of where he had gone, when he began to miss obligations. He did not show up for work and he failed to meet his son for a scheduled oral surgery with a necessary insurance form. When Michael's friend from work found out he never returned from Hermosa Beach, she filed a missing persons report with the local authorities. Friends and family members who went to look for Michael in Hermosa Beach were told that it was too soon to begin an investigation there. While waiting for the police to take Michael's disappearance seriously, those close to him began a grassroots search, canvassing the area with flyers and asking for information on Facebook. Pier Plaza has a high concentration of security cameras, and there were hopes that it would help solve the case. After a few false starts and attempting to find Michael in the hours of footage, a timeline of Michael's evening was pieced together. Security footage shows him with a group of friends in line at American Junkie, as well as him leaving to go to the liquor store. He is seen on camera going into the store and leaving after about a minute when he was not able to find a restroom there. While he was gone, his friends had decided to move on to a different bar. Michael is seen circling the plaza, apparently looking for his friends and just missing them several times as they bar hopped. He returned to the liquor store later in the evening to purchase a small bottle of whiskey. While he is at the counter, he is seen trying to use his cell phone, but the screen does not light up, seeming to indicate that the phone was not working, possibly because the battery was dead. Michael is last seen on camera at 11:27 p.m. walking in the direction of the beach. Michael loved the water. He enjoyed swimming and water sports. His love of the water seemed to increase when he was drinking, with family members reporting multiple stories of Michael swimming in the ocean at night while intoxicated. This opened up the possibility that Michael had gone for a swim, been pulled out by a strong current, and drowned. However, Michael had left his clothes and personal effects on the beach in his other instances of dangerous night swimming. Nothing belonging to Michael was found by the water after he went missing. Michael's brother Tyler made the decision in late 2016 to move from Baltimore to California so that he could be a part of Michael's children's lives. Michael's family's hopes that one day, if Michael is not alive to rejoin his family, they can still discover what happened to him on that night in March. Brenda Jackson was an Army veteran who served a tour in Iraq. Unfortunately, she also faced violence on the home front. In August 2015, her 6 children were removed from her custody after a domestic violence incident with her husband, Antonio Jackson. There was such an extensive history of domestic violence in Brenda's marriage that when she failed to press charges against Antonio, the courts viewed their home as unsafe for the children. Brenda's oldest child was sent to live with their father, Brenda's first husband, in Texas, and the remaining 5 children were placed with Brenda's parents. Brenda was allowed supervised visits with the children. The separation from her children spurred Brenda to action. She separated from Antonio and eventually filed for divorce to show that she could provide her kids with a safe environment. In January 2016, she was living on her own in Park Forest, Illinois. Around 9 p.m. on January 3rd, Brenda's father dropped her off at her home on Arcadia Street. At approximately 10:30 that night, Brenda spoke on the phone with her mother. This would be the last known contact with Brenda. Brenda did not show up for work as a food service worker at Rich South High School the following morning. On January 5th, Brenda's mother and estranged husband reported her missing to the police. Inside her home, police found Brenda's purse, identification, and coat. The temperature in the area at that time consistently was barely above freezing, so it is unlikely that Brenda left home willingly without her jacket. 8 days after Brenda went missing, her mother received a phone call stating that she could find Brenda at a forest preserve not far from her home. A search was organized but found no sign of her. There were reports of sightings of Brenda in nearby Chicago shortly after she disappeared, but they were never verified. 3 weeks after Brenda vanished, her children were removed from their grandparents' home and placed in foster homes. The Department of Children and Family Services made this decision after learning that Brenda's parents allowed the children's father, Antonio, to have supervised visits with his children. According to the department, this was a violation of the safety plan set in place for the children, and Brenda's parents did not fully understand the dangers of allowing such visits. According to an unconfirmed account from a family friend, Brenda's family only allowed these visits because they suspected him of playing a role in Brenda's disappearance and hoped that by seeing Antonio regularly, they could discover information about Brenda's case. While Brenda's father hopes that his daughter is still alive, her mother believes that she met with foul play. It would be too out of character for her daughter, who loved her children and never walked away from a challenge, to have simply run away and start a new life. She still hopes that she will find closure in Brenda's case so that she can give answers to her grandchildren. Thomas Messick Sr. served in the United States Army as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. He married his wife Beverly in 1959 and lived in Brunswick, New York. On November 15, 2015, he embarked on an annual hunting trip with 6 of his friends in the Adirondack Mountains. The group entered the Lake George Wild Forest near Lily Pond Roof. Thomas was last seen around 10 a.m. The other hunters with him had planned to stalk deer and lead them back towards Thomas and another hunter so that Thomas would not have to cover a large distance. The group was supposed to meet at a designated location at a designated time that afternoon. Thomas did not make it to the meetup. The hunting party alerted forest rangers and they searched for Thomas from 4:30 in the afternoon until midnight. They were unsuccessful in finding Thomas or any of his belongings. While this hunting party had made this trip for 55 years, this was the first year they had gone to this particular location to hunt, so Thomas was not as familiar with the area as he was with his own hunting camp where the trip usually took place. Thomas had lost one of his eyes in his early 20s due to an accident, so his vision was limited. He had almost skipped the outing in 2015 because he had just finished recovering from shingles. He also had a history of cardiac problems. This led to an early theory that Thomas had begun having a medical emergency and started walking for help before collapsing somewhere out of view. However, Thomas could not have made it very far in such condition. If this scenario did occur, either he or his body should have been discovered relatively quickly. The immediate area where he was last seen was searched thoroughly and rangers spent 2 months searching outlying areas. Almost 300 trained searchers combed the area for Thomas a week after he went missing. Aerial searches of the area were also performed. Canine units, the FBI Quick Response Team, the Warren County Sheriff's Office, and many other agencies also helped in the search. Despite these extensive and expert efforts, no sign of Thomas was ever discovered anywhere in the woods. His fate remains a mystery. Margaret Hodigan had a fiery spirit. Independent and willful as a child, she surprisingly thrived in grueling but structured environments as an adult. She served as a volunteer firefighter in Warren Township, New Jersey. In 2001, she left her young daughter with her parents so that she could enlist in the United States Army. She served for 2 years before requiring a medical discharge. Upon returning to New Jersey, Margaret resumed firefighting and through it met Tim McEnroe, who would become her husband and the father of Margaret's 2 youngest daughters. Margaret's intense personality posed challenges in her marriage, however. She and her husband were known to have intense arguments. On October 9, 2006, they got into an argument so severe that police were called to their home for domestic disturbance. Margaret had left to go to her parents' home to calm down. She returned home later that night. The following day, October 10th, Margaret called Tim midday to ask him to pick up baby formula for their 5-month-old daughter. He stopped at home around 1:30 p.m. to drop it off and then left to continue working the landscaping job he was at that day. This would be the last time anyone saw Margaret. When Tim returned home at 3 p.m., Margaret was not there. The couple's infant daughter was left at the house alone in her crib. Tim did not report his wife missing until October 12th. Police investigated every imaginable scenario that may result in a person going missing. Frustratingly, all of them have clues that make them possible, and all of them have clues that rule them out in this case. Could Margaret have run off to start a new life? She was known to go off to cool down after getting into confrontations. She had even gone off for several days a few times in her past. The only things that Margaret's husband reported missing from their home were a black duffel bag and a large amount of cash. He has not been consistent in reporting exactly how much cash, but it could have been up to $11,000. Margaret's friends and family argue that this scenario is impossible because of how fiercely protective Margaret was of her children. She had not run away since becoming a mother, and she certainly would not have left her infant daughter alone in her house. While Margaret was dedicated to all of her children, her youngest daughter had been born prematurely and required extra medical care. Margaret would not let her out of her sight for most of her young life, so it is almost inconceivable that she would have left her all alone. The theory that Margaret met with foul play also has holes in it. There was no sign of forced entry, or any indication of a struggle inside of her home. Margaret was trained in martial arts and learned self-defense in the army. Her personality was such that she would fight if she were under attack, and her skill set would have given her a good chance at winning. Even if someone did overpower her, things should have been knocked out of place in the fight she would have put up. If she did meet with foul play, it was most likely at the hands of someone she trusted, who she would have willingly let into the house, not had her guard up around. On Thanksgiving Day, roughly 6 weeks after Margaret vanished, police located an army T-shirt a mile away from Margaret's home. Tim identified it as belonging to his wife. Forensic examination of the shirt did not provide any helpful information to police. This was the last piece of physical evidence recovered in the case. In 2011, the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office named Tim McEnroe as a person of interest in his wife's disappearance. This was due to Tim's perceived lack of complete cooperation with authorities and details on his account of the day Margaret went missing changing over time. He has never been charged in relation to the case. Margaret's oldest daughter, Sarah, who turned 21 in 2018, is a member of the United States Marine Corps and, like her mother, has served as a volunteer firefighter. Margaret's father passed away in 2013. Margaret's mother, Eileen, lights a candle for Margaret every week in the prayer garden at Our Lady of the Mount Catholic Church and holds a prayer service every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Lonnie Green was a veteran of the United States Navy. In 2014, he was living in the borough of Bellevue, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. On December 4th of that year, 60-year-old Lonnie was spending the afternoon at the home of his brother, Benny, in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. Lonnie had been watching television when he suddenly stood up and told Benny that he would be back in 20 minutes. Benny did not press him for details as to where he was going. Lonnie left his brother's home but did not return within 20 minutes. He has not been seen since. Lonnie's social security, bank account, and cell phone have not been used since he went missing. While he did have previous substance abuse problems, he was sober at the time he went missing. His family says he showed no signs of relapsing. Lonnie's family has been actively searching for him. They have made missing persons posters and hung them around the greater Pittsburgh area. Unfortunately, they do not have the financial resources to hire a private investigator or offer a reward to help generate leads in the case. Since Lonnie's finances were not utilized after the last time he was seen, his rent was obviously not paid. His landlord was understanding about the situation. But in March of 2015, Lonnie's family packed up all of his belongings and moved him out of his home. He remains missing, and there are few leads in the case. 28-year-old John Cheek was a hard-working man whose efforts were on the brink of paying off at the end of 1993. He had become the chief financial officer of a major real estate company fresh out of business school, and he already owned a home of his own in Memphis, Tennessee. He had spent the better part of 1993 working on a business deal that would take his company public, a move that would earn John millions of dollars in stock options and provide him with a six-figure salary. The large reward was not without large effort, however. John had spent the better part of 1993 working 18-hour days and traveling extensively working on the details of the deal. He had just returned from a 3-day multi-city business trip and told a work friend that he had not slept in more than 72 hours. He had a business dinner on the night of December 2nd, at which he became slightly intoxicated. A coworker dropped John off at his car, parked near the intersection of Poplar and Ridgeway in Memphis. This was the last confirmed sighting of John. The next day, John did not show up for work, which was highly out of character for him. His 1987 Acura Legend was found abandoned near the Interstate 55 bridge over the Mississippi River. The immediate concern was that John had committed suicide by jumping into the river, but his family is adamant that he would not do that, and a subsequent search of the river did not locate John's body. There were unconfirmed sightings around the country shortly after John went missing, but a credible one did not occur until February of 1994. On Valentine's Day, a truck driver named Ron Jackson saw a missing persons flyer with John's picture on it at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Ron believed that the man in the photo was a man he had met the day prior in Raffine, Virginia. On February 13th, Ron had seen a man he assumed was a drifter sleeping on a couch in the Raffine truck stop. Ron had woken the man up and offered to buy him breakfast, simply trying to be kind to someone who appeared to be down on his luck. Ron believed that there was something wrong with the man mentally, in part because he claimed to be living in an Arkansas homeless shelter but was hundreds of miles away from Arkansas in Virginia. However, he did not think that the man was a typical homeless person. His clothes were clean and well cared for, and he spoke as though he had a high level of education. John's family was convinced that this was a true sighting of John. When they heard that the man had been wearing a type of slip-on moccasin consistent with the kind that John liked to wear. John's family subscribes to the theory that John had some sort of psychological break due to the stress of his job and was wandering the country, potentially unaware of who he is or where his home is. As John's whereabouts remain unknown, this remains an option. However, no other option can be ruled out either. John could have committed suicide and his body was just never located. John could have been killed for his share of the earnings his company would have made after it went public. The company, Mid-America Apartment Communities Incorporated, has assets of almost $11.5 billion as of 2017 and brought in $1.5 billion in revenue that year alone. Until John or his remains are found, the truth about his disappearance will remain unknown. Ashley Heavy Runner Loring was a member of the Blackfeet Nation living on the Blackfeet Reservation near Browning, Montana. The 20-year-old had endured some instability in her life, but things had worked out in her favor. She and her older sister Kimberly had spent several months in foster care as children while their mother battled substance abuse. The sisters ultimately were allowed to live with their grandparents on their horse ranch where they learned to ride and spent their summer swimming in a nearby creek. Ashley was completing her studies at Blackfeet Community College and planning to finish her degree at the University of Montana. To do so, Ashley was going to move in with Kimberly in her apartment in Missoula, Montana. Kimberly had moved to Missoula after getting a well-paying job working with senior citizens. Ashley had to wait to move, however, until Kimberly returned from a vacation in early June. Upon her return, Kimberly was not able to contact her sister. She was not able to find her at her home either. Ashley had vanished. The exact day of Ashley's disappearance, as well as her movements prior to it, are not known. The last time her family remember seeing her was in early June 2017. The Bureau of Indian Affairs told Ashley's family that she was an adult and had probably gone off to live on her own somewhere. Her family did not believe this to be the case. Since Ashley was close with her family, it would not have cut off communication with her. She also had been waiting 3 months to be able to move in with her sister. If she really were that anxious to leave the reservation, she would not have agreed to the arrangement she had with Kimberly. The Loring family has not had consistent assistance from law enforcement in the search for Ashley. The effort is largely headed by Kimberly. After Ashley went missing, Kimberly quit her job and moved back in with her grandmother on the reservation so that she can search for her sister. The Blackfeet Reservation is covered in missing persons posters made by the Loring family. Kimberly searches social media posts and follows up on every rumor or hypothesis she hears about her sister's case. The most time-consuming and dangerous aspect of Kimberly's activism on behalf of her sister is the physical searching she does. Kimberly organizes and leads grueling searches almost every other day. She and whatever family members are available on any given day cover rugged and remote territory, armed with bear mace and shotguns to protect themselves. "I'm the older sister. I need to do this," Kimberly told the Associated Press. "I don't want to search until I'm 80, but if I have to, I will." In March of 2018, the FBI took over as the lead investigating agency on the case, replacing the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Ashley's disappearance remains unsolved. Kevin Hicks lived with his family in Croydon in South London. The 16-year-old was described as a happy teenager who had no problems at school or with his grades. On Sunday, March 2, 1986, he left home at approximately 8:30 p.m. He told his mother that he needed eggs for a home economics exam the following day. He left home with only £1 to head to the Sparing store just a few minutes away on Lower Addiscombe Road. At approximately 10 p.m., an hour and a half after Kevin left home for his quick errand, a friend saw him on Shirley Road heading in the direction of his house. This person would be the last to ever see Kevin. That same night, Derek Hicks, Kevin's father, had a work emergency and had to leave home at 9 p.m. to handle it. When he arrived back at his house at 11, Kevin was not yet home. Since Kevin was a courteous son who would call if he were going to be late, Derek went out again to drive around looking for Kevin. Friends of Kevin's were called and then the police. The following morning, police went to the John Ruskin School where Kevin was a student. None of his friends or classmates could tell them where he was. The police also went to the Sparrings to inquire about Kevin's trip there. Unfortunately, the security camera in the shop did not have a tape in it the night Kevin went missing, and the staff could not remember if Kevin had been there or not. As such, it is unclear if Kevin ever made it to the store, where if that really were his intended destination. Investigators performed extensive searches of nearby parks and metro stations but were unable to locate any sign of Kevin. The case ultimately went cold. On October 25, 1996, an anonymous caller left a voicemail message at the offices of the Croydon Advertiser and claimed they knew the location of Kevin's body. Police were unable to trace the call and the lead went nowhere. In 2016, the Metropolitan Police announced a £20,000 reward for information in Kevin's case. They also indicated that they believed that Kevin was murdered the night he went missing and that they were looking to recover his body. Kevin's mother passed away from a brain tumor in October of 1994. His father passed away 10 years later. Kevin's younger sister, Alexandra, continues to search for information about what happened to her brother. In 1983, Mary Emma Hammond was a 25-year-old newlywed living in a townhome on Elgin Street in Brantford, Ontario. On the morning of September 8th, she left home at 3:30 a.m. for her shift at the Buns Master Bakery, roughly a mile away. Her husband of 4 months, Larry, offered to drive her, but she decided to walk. At 4 a.m., one of Mary's co-workers called Larry to inquire about Mary's whereabouts. She had not made it to the bakery. The police were called to investigate. They were able to trace Mary's footprints on her route to work up until the bakery's rear property line, where Mary would have had to cut across a field to get to the entrance. While there was no sign of Mary herself, some of her possessions had been left behind, including one of her socks, a half-eaten apple, and a dish from her packed lunch. Ominously, police also located a small amount of blood at the scene. The only lead police were able to uncover at the time of Mary's disappearance was a truck seen parked behind the bakery around the time she vanished. It was an older model brown truck, potentially a Ford, with a painted bumper and round headlights. No solid link between the truck and Mary's disappearance has ever been made, and the truck and its driver were never located. Mary's disappearance remains unsolved. In 1973, 21-year-old Henry Baltimore Jr. was a junior at Michigan State University in Lansing, Michigan. He was a drum major at the university and was studying music. His family described him as lively and fun-loving, but also as a natural leader. He had an apartment with 2 roommates in Lansing and seemed to have everything going for him. Unfortunately, that would change in March of 1973. On March 3rd, Henry was robbed at gunpoint by 2 men in his apartment. He was tied to his bed while the 2 men stole $110 in cash, a golf bag, some clothes, and a watch. Henry did not immediately report the crime because the 2 men threatened him. 10 days later, after his father convinced him to change his mind, he finally filed a police report. It was believed that Henry knew the men because they were quickly arrested. One of the men involved in the robbery had never been publicly identified, but the other was named Roy Davis. He was a 22-year-old from Flint, Michigan. Henry was scheduled to testify against Davis at a preliminary hearing after Davis was charged with armed robbery. Davis returned to Henry's apartment on multiple occasions to threaten him in order him not to testify. Henry did not appear in court as scheduled. The obvious conclusion would be that Henry, still fearful over the threats made against him, did not show up out of concern for his physical safety. According to the Baltimore family, Henry had in actuality been absent from court that day because one of his family members had a medical emergency. The court did not care what the reason was. A warrant was issued for Henry for his failure to appear in court, and he had to pay a $50 fine. On May 30th, Henry's sister Laurel, who was a graduate student at Michigan State, went to Henry's apartment. She had agreed to type a final exam paper for him and needed to pick it up. Henry was not home. He would never be seen again. Henry had been rescheduled to testify in court. Just 2 days after he went missing. The 2 obvious theories in Henry's disappearance tie back to the criminal trial. Either Henry ran away to avoid testifying out of fear that the men who robbed him would hurt him in retaliation, or the men did something to him before he had another opportunity to testify. It would have been difficult for Henry to leave of his own accord, as he left behind all his possessions, including his vehicle and all of his money. Roy Davis reportedly was heard banging on Henry's apartment door the day he went missing. Davis eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in the robbery and served 6 months in jail. He has never been charged with any crime in relation to Henry's disappearance. Both of Henry's parents and 2 of his 7 siblings have since passed away, never learning what happened to Henry. Henry's disappearance remains the East Lansing Police Department's oldest cold case. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Phoenix Colton was a gifted young woman. Her family described her as responsible and intelligent, and she had an inquisitive mind. She excelled in numerous areas, from athletics to the arts. She was a regional champion in fencing, and she played numerous musical instruments, including the guitar, violin, and piano. Homeschooled for most of her early education, she had enrolled at the University of Missouri at St. Louis to work towards her bachelor's degree. In 2011, 23-year-old Phoenix attended church and went food shopping with her parents before returning to their Spanish Lake, Missouri home in the early afternoon. Around 3 p.m., her father Lawrence saw Phoenix sitting in her car on her phone. This was not unusual behavior for his daughter. A few minutes later, he noticed that Phoenix had driven off. This was somewhat unusual. Phoenix would usually let her parents know where she was going before leaving the house. However, Lawrence assumed that his daughter was going off to see a friend or visit the neighborhood convenience store. By midnight, however, Phoenix's parents realized that something was wrong. Phoenix has not been seen since she left her driveway that day in December. The investigation into her disappearance has been problematic since the beginning. The Colton family has publicly alleged that both the police and the local media have not taken Phoenix's disappearance seriously because she is black. The lack of cooperation in the immediate aftermath of Phoenix going missing has potentially resulted in evidence being lost. When Phoenix's family finally received a concrete clue about where she had gone after she left her home, it did nothing to assuage the fears they had for Phoenix's safety. At 5:30 p.m. the day Phoenix disappeared, her black 1998 Chevy Blazer had been found in an unsafe area of East St. Louis. The car was running and the driver's side door was open. Left in the car were Phoenix's glasses, shoes, purse, and identification. The car was towed by the police. Phoenix's parents would not learn that the car had been found until January 2nd, when a family member was able to track it down. Not receiving the help they needed from authorities, Goldia and Lawrence Cullen have had to rely on private investigators heavily in their fervent search for their only child. They have tracked down every lead they have received, even some that have turned out to be cruel hoaxes. Unfortunately, the Colton family home was foreclosed upon a few months after Phoenix vanished, when Goldie and Lawrence had to use their mortgage budget to cover the costs of their search. After Phoenix went missing, it was discovered that she had not taken classes in the fall semester. This could indicate that Phoenix had some sort of stressor in her life that she had chosen not to share with her family. The state Phoenix's vehicle was found in obviously points to her being the victim of some sort of violence, potentially pulled out of her car and taken somewhere against her will. It remains unclear if she was the victim of random violence or an attack rooted in her personal life. 39-year-old Billy Oliveira lived in Nahiku, Hawaii, on the island of Maui. Billy had been raised by his grandparents and legally adopted by them when he was 16. By 2015, his grandfather had passed away, but Billy remained close with his grandmother and continued to live with her. At approximately 10:30 p.m. on July 13th, Billy and his grandmother heard a vehicle pull up outside their house. Because the vehicle was so loud, his grandmother assumed it was a truck. Billy went outside to see who had stopped by. Billy's grandmother did not realize that this would be the last time she saw her grandson. Billy never came back into the house after going to investigate the arrival of the vehicle. Because of this and the fact that the vehicle sounded like a truck, Billy's grandmother assumed that he had been picked up by one of his half-brothers. However, the following morning, another one of Billy's half-brothers arrived to pick him up for plans they had made. Billy's grandmother told him where she thought he was, and his half-brother left to pick him up at his brother's home. However, Billy was not there. No other family members had picked him up. Billy had left his cell phone inside when he had gone outside on the night of the 13th, so his family could not call him or track his phone. The police would not allow the Oliveira family to file a missing persons report for several days. As such, the initial search effort was left to his family. The beautiful lush foliage around Billy's secluded home made physically searching for him difficult, but his family did their best. They were eventually able to get assistance from Maui Search and Rescue, a volunteer organization on the island. The search dogs the group brought with them lost Billy scent very close to his house. Billy's family has always maintained that he would not have vanished voluntarily, mainly due to the close relationship he had with his grandmother. Even as an adult, he remained courteous about sharing his plans with his grandmother. He would never go anywhere without telling her where he would be and calling to check in when he arrived. Furthermore, he was a homebody with few close friends who preferred to stay in the familiar surroundings of his home and read. The unidentified vehicle that pulled up to the Oliveira house that night is obviously the clue that could solve the case. No one has ever come forward identifying themselves as the person who came to the house that night. This has increased suspicions that whoever was in the vehicle in some way harmed Billy. This remains merely a suspicion, as neither Billy nor his remains have ever been found. In 1964, 15-year-old Reed Jepson was living what many would consider the ideal teenage life in Salt Lake City, Utah. He had just scored his first touchdown as a player for the East High School football team. He had a paper route and was careful with his money. He had 11 siblings and was always looking out for them. His father was a doctor and his family regularly attended church. Reed loved the outdoors and spent his summers working on his family's ranch in Montana. He responsibly raised and trained German short-haired pointers to be bird-hunting dogs. On Sunday, October 11th, the Jepsons returned home after a morning spent at church. While some members of the family began preparing Sunday dinner, Reed changed from his church clothes into a pair of Levi's and had to go outside to feed and walk his 2 dogs. The 2 dogs, one adult and one puppy, were housed in a kennel in the family's backyard. Reed and the 2 dogs never returned home, shattering the Jepson family's picturesque life. A friend reported seeing Reed walking the dogs near a school in the Jepsons' neighborhood around 1 p.m. This is the last reported sighting of him. Reed's large family was able to conduct an extensive search immediately after he went missing, and they plastered the area with flyers. Their efforts did not lead anywhere. In May of 1967, Reed's older sister Suzanne thought she saw him in a car on Interstate 80. She took down the car's license plate and reported the sighting to the police. They followed up on the lead, but the person in the car was just someone who strongly resembled Reed. The Jepson family has always maintained that Reed would not run away. There were no problems in his home life that would give him a reason to. Further supporting this claim is the fact that all of Reed's savings and belongings were left at his home. However, a logical scenario for how he went missing is hard to fathom. The athletic teenager would have been difficult to physically overpower and abduct. However, if he were involved in some sort of accident, his dogs should have been located. It appears that someone else was involved in Reed and his dogs going missing, but the specifics of the role they played remain unclear. Reed's siblings have remained active in searching for their brother and keeping the police focused on it, even as the years since Reed was last seen have turned to decades. The Salt Lake City Police Department announced in 2010 that they were formally reopening the investigation into Reed's disappearance. Many of Reed's siblings were there for the announcement. They were also there waiting for news when, in 2012, authorities brought in cadaver dogs and a backhoe to search a gully behind Clayton Middle School. The dig was performed based on a tip. Even after digging 8 feet into the ground, police found no evidence relating to Reed's case. Reed's siblings have provided DNA samples to 2 missing persons databases. As of 2018, if Reed is still alive, he'll be 69 years old. In 1993, 35-year-old Catherine Adam was in the midst of a divorce. She and her husband Gerald had separated after a marriage that dated back to when Catherine was just 18. Catherine lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 16-year-old daughter in Salina, Kansas, and worked delivering hosiery to support them. On April 30th, Catherine's daughter called the police to report her mother missing. On the morning of April 29th, Catherine had visited a quick-shop convenience store at approximately 4:30 a.m. to pick up a coffee at a newspaper before filling her van with gasoline and starting work. The security camera in the store captured the last known picture of Catherine. Her routine was to then go to a storage unit to load her white Ford van, which bore the Legs Company logo, with inventory for her day's deliveries. None of Catherine's scheduled deliveries were made that day. Her van was discovered abandoned at 5:45 p.m. on April 30th. It was parked at Russell's restaurant, which had been closed for renovations at the time. The outside of the car was splattered with mud. Inside the car, there was a small amount of blood. Police discovered a larger amount of blood outside Catherine's storage unit. Tests would later confirm that it was Catherine's blood. The door of the unit had been left open, leaving them to believe that Catherine had been attacked while she was in the middle of loading her truck for the day. The storage facility was fenced in, meaning that whoever assaulted Catherine would have needed a way to access the gate. While the circumstances around her disappearance seemed to indicate foul play, Catherine's body has never been recovered. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Curtis Pishin started his adult life with a lot of accomplishments. He got a job as a police dispatcher after he graduated high school and eventually joined the army and served with the military police in Korea. He obtained a bachelor's degree and joined the Concord, New Hampshire Police Department in 1983. In 1994, Curtis's public service career was cut short. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which ultimately left him without the dexterity to fire his service weapon with the required accuracy. The diagnosis and its consequences were devastating for Curtis. He became depressed and began drinking heavily. He began a career as a security guard to use some of his skills from his career as a police officer while not being required to use a gun. He lost one security job after showing up for work intoxicated. He was hired to work third-shift security at Venture Corporation, a factory that produced plastic automotive components in Seabrook, New Hampshire in 1998. He was able to successfully hold down that position and was still working there in the summer of 2000. At approximately 9:30 p.m. on July 4, 2000, Curtis arrived at work. His shift started off as normal and he made his routine check-in with his supervisor at midnight. The other employees at the factory all stated that he was behaving normally. The night took a dramatic turn at 1:42 a.m. on July 5th, when Curtis called the fire department to report that his car was on fire. The fire department was able to extinguish the fire, but the car was a total loss. Curtis was known to keep his valuables in his vehicle, which made the loss of the car even worse. Despite this, everyone who spoke with Curtis said that he seemed to handle the fire in stride. The factory's security supervisor spoke with Curtis at approximately 3:25 a.m., at which point he still seemed fine. When another employee arrived for work at 3:45, however, Curtis was not at his station. He has not been seen since. Curtis' recent health problems, the loss of his car and the possessions inside of it, and his forced career change could all point to him going off to commit suicide. His family does not support this theory. More recent developments in Curtis' case seem to discredit the suicide theory. Police have had a person of interest in the case since 2005. They believe that the car fire was set as a diversion while there was no solid evidence of arson found in the vehicle. There was no indication of an accidental cause of it either. The night Curtis went missing, a vending machine and a change machine inside the factory were broken into using a company forklift. It has been speculated that Curtis could have walked in on this crime as it was happening. He subsequently could have been killed to ensure his silence. Curtis had previously spoken to his family about feeling unsafe at work because of illegal activities taking place in the factory's parking lot. Authorities have not been able to gather enough evidence to bring charges against anyone, however, and Curtis's case remains open. On January 7, 1969, Jane Britton failed to show up for an exam. This was highly out of character for the Harvard graduate student. She was the daughter of an accomplished scholar and had graduated magna cum laude with her bachelor's degree from Radcliffe College before beginning her advanced studies in anthropology. Her classmate and boyfriend, James Humphreys, tried calling to check on her after the exam. When Jane had failed to answer the phone, he headed over to her fourth-floor apartment on the University Road. There, at 12:40 in the afternoon, James discovered Jane's body, lying face down on her bed. Jane had an eventful evening filled with outings with friends and her boyfriend on the night of January 6th and stopped by her neighbor's apartment for a glass of sherry on her way home at approximately 11:30 p.m. Jane's autopsy showed she had alcohol in her stomach, but tests for alcohol in her blood came back negative, meaning that she had been attacked shortly after returning home. The autopsy also showed that she had been sexually assaulted and died as a result of a beating so severe that fragments of her skull had cut and bruised her brain. A neighbor reported hearing someone out on the fire escape the night of the murder, leading police to believe that the perpetrator had used the fire escape to gain entry to Jane's apartment. Jane's case garnered national media attention, but the investigation ultimately went cold. In July 2018, the Massachusetts State Police got a soft hit in the FBI's combined DNA index system to DNA found at James Crimson. The DNA that remained available for testing yielded a Y-Steer profile, a type of profile that is specific to men because it involves analysis of the Y chromosome. They were able to confirm the match after finding a DNA profile on Ancestry.com that belonged to a male relative of the killer. The relative provided a fresh sample that confirmed the match. On November 20th, 2018, the Middlesex County District Attorney announced that Jane's killer had been identified through DNA as Michael Sumter, a career criminal who died of cancer in 2001 at 54, shortly after completing a prison sentence for a rape he committed in 1975. The new DNA tests eliminate 99.92% of the male population as contributors of the DNA at the crime scene, confirmed the soft hit and Cody's, and eliminated Michael's brother, the relative with the Ancestry.com profile, as a possible contributor of the DNA. Since his death, Michael has also been identified as the perpetrator in 4 other sexual assaults, 2 of which also resulted in the murder of the victim. Jane's case is the oldest cold case solved by the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office in its history. Leslie Marie Perlov was a graduate of Stanford University. The 21-year-old was working at the North County Law Library in Palo Alto, California, while waiting to begin law school at the University of Pennsylvania in 1973. She was a brilliant and dedicated student, but her hard work would tragically never culminate in an Ivy League law degree. Lisa was last seen alive at work on February 13, 1973 at 3 p.m. That same day, her Chevrolet Nova was found abandoned near a quarry off of Old Page Mill Road. 3 days later, her body was discovered west of where her car had been found, under an oak tree. She had been strangled and left face down with her skirt pulled up past her waist. The case would have to wait for technology to advance before it could be solved. In July 2018, DNA found on Leslie's body was submitted to Parabon Nanolabs, a company in Virginia that combines DNA analysis with forensic genealogy. Using the information the lab provided, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office was able to identify a suspect. They collected a discarded DNA sample, a sample collected from an item used by the suspect, that they have thrown away or left behind somewhere, to confirm that the suspect's DNA matched the sample from Leslie's body. On November 20, 2018, the suspect, 74-year-old John Arthur Jatro, was arrested and charged with murder during an attempted rape in connection with Leslie's death. The odds of someone other than Jatro contributing the DNA found on Leslie's body have been estimated to be 1 in 65 septillion. Jatro had been working as a security guard in Palo Alto in 1973. This was in spite of the fact that in 1964 he had raped and killed the 16-year-old daughter of the chaplain for the Army's 8th Infantry Division. The crime occurred in Germany, where Jatro's father, who was an officer in the Army, was stationed. Since 18-year-old Jatro was considered a juvenile under German law, he was eligible to be released and sent back to the United States after just 2 years in prison. In the end, it was Leslie and her tenacity that helped authorities close the case. At a press conference announcing Jatro's arrest, Santa Clara County Deputy District Attorney Matt Bracken said Leslie Perlov solved this case because she fought desperately for her life. In the process, she gathered the DNA evidence that was used to identify the killer. 25-year-old Christy Merak was a 6th-grade teacher at Rohrerstown Elementary School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. On December 21, 1992, Christy's roommate left for work at 7 a.m. while Christy was watching some TV before leaving herself. Christy's normal routine was to wake up early so she could have a leisurely morning before leaving for work at 7:45. However, she never arrived at school that morning. When Christy failed to show up for work, the principal of the school tried calling her home multiple times but received no answer. He then called Christy's mother to see if she had heard from her. She had not. She gave the principal Christy's address, and he began to drive to her home, hoping to see her car broken down somewhere along her route. He did not. When he arrived at Christy's apartment, the front door was cracked open. Inside, the principal discovered Christy's badly beaten body. He would later be determined that she had been strangled and raped. Evidence at the scene suggested that Christy had fiercely fought her killer. She was still wearing her coat and gloves as though she had been attacked just as she was leaving the house. As the person who discovered Christy's body, the principal was an early suspect, as was Christy's boyfriend, who turned out to be a married man 20 years her senior. All of these potential early suspects were quickly ruled out. 26 years after the murder, DNA evidence would point the investigation to a complete surprise of a suspect. DNA had been found on and near Christy's body, but her killer's DNA was not in any criminal database, so police could never find a match for it. In 2015, the case was taken over by a cold case unit. In 2017, the unit also reached out to Parabod Nanolabs, who generated a composite of what the killer may have looked like at different ages based on the traits in his DNA. The composites were released to the public in November 2017, but no one reported knowing anyone who resembled them. Forensic genealogist C.C. Moore, in partnership with Parabon, entered the DNA profile from the crime scene into an open-source genealogy site to locate distant relatives of the perpetrator. From there, she was able to narrow down the suspect pool to a family in Lancaster County and ultimately identify a single suspect. The police surveilled the suspect and collected a water bottle and some chewing gum. The suspect, when the DNA from these items was tested, it was a match to the DNA from the crime scene. On June 25, 2018, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office announced the arrest of Raymond Charles Rowe for Christie's murder. 49-year-old Rowe was well known in the local community. He was a local DJ, publicly known as DJ Freeze. In 1992, he was the house DJ at the Chameleon Club, a popular music venue. And by 2018, he was one of the most sought-after wedding DJs in Lancaster County. He was a husband and a father and had recently become very religious. His only criminal charge was for disorderly conduct, which was incurred in 2001 when he played music too loudly while DJing. That charge was ultimately dismissed. Rowe is expected to go to trial in May of 2019, more than 26 years after the murder of Christy Murat. On March 19, 1993, a 6-year-old boy in Toronto called 911. The child had woken up and discovered the body of his mother, 41-year-old Barbara Brodkin. When the police arrived at the apartment at 155 Balliol Street, they discovered that Barbara had been stabbed once in the chest. During their initial investigation, authorities interviewed over 100 people but could not make an arrest in the case. In August of 2017, Barbara's case was reopened. Evidence from her crime scene was submitted in hopes that it would reveal DNA evidence that could not have been identified in 1993. The effort was successful. On October 19, 2018, police arrested 63-year-old Charles Mustard. Charles was known to police, which is why his DNA was available for them to compare to the DNA from the crime scene. A small amount of money and marijuana had been missing from Barbara's apartment, leading police to initially believe that Barbara had been the victim of a robbery. But Charles was an acquaintance of Barbara and her family, meaning there may have been a more personal motive in the crime. While police believe the DNA evidence proves that Charles committed the crime, they still have an appeal to the public to help with the case. They asked at a news conference following Charles's arrest for 2 individuals to come forward. Linda and Dirk were reportedly acquaintances of both Barbara and Charles, and authorities believe they may have important information that may help in convicting Charles. 35-year-old Charles Clark of Mentor, Ohio, planned to spend Christmas Eve of 1959 caroling with the Boy Scout troop he was the leader of. The father of 4 was also a Sunday school superintendent and an engineer at Reliance Electric. At 6:40 p.m., he was in his kitchen opening a can of pumpkin for his wife, who was making pie for Christmas dinner. Charles was then shot in his right temple, through the kitchen window. He fell to the floor and died, clad in his Boy Scout uniform. Charles's 12-year-old daughter Carol told police that her father had only been in front of the window for 4 seconds, meaning that the killer had been lying in wait and must have been a skilled sniper. Suspicion quickly turned to a man named Floyd Hargrove. Hargrove was a 34-year-old divorced truck driver. He had served as a rifleman in the Air Force, where he had earned a medal for sharpshooting. He was also one of 6 men Charles Clark's wife, Lois, had admitted to having an affair with. Hargrove was arrested for the murder a mere 3 hours after it occurred. He was released after he passed a polygraph examination. He was rearrested 5 days later after police received a phone call from a friend of Hargrove's named John Ozinger, Jr. According to Ozinger, Hargrove had confessed to him that he had purchased a .22 caliber rifle on December 23 for the purpose of killing Charles Clark. Under a purported truth serum administered by a psychiatrist, Hargrove did admit to killing Charles so that he would be able to marry Lois. He further stated that he had thrown the rifle into the Chagrin River after the crime. At his trial in 1960, he claimed that he had only confessed because police were threatening to make his affair with Lois public, and he desperately wanted to keep it a secret. He did concede that he had wanted to marry Lois, going so far as to ask her to divorce Clark in the summer of 1959, but she had refused to, not wanting to hurt her husband's feelings. On June 8, 1960, a jury found Hargrove not guilty. A juror told a reporter that while members of the jury thought that it was possible that Hargrove committed the crime, the state did not successfully prove that he did. Lois Clark received over $100,000 in life insurance following her husband's death. She denied any prior knowledge of the crime, and Charles Clark's parents publicly supported her, even after her infidelity came to light. No one else has ever been brought to trial for the murder, so Charles's case remains unsolved. Cesar Torralba lived in Asbury Park, New Jersey with his wife Minerva and their 2 young daughters. On Christmas Eve of 2007, he left his family's apartment on 6th Street to visit the Super Extra grocery store. His father was flying in from Mexico for Christmas, and Cesar wanted to make stuffed chilies for Christmas dinner for him. He successfully purchased the necessary ingredients for the meal, but ran into trouble before he could make it home. Minerva Torralba heard her husband's voice outside their apartment and assumed that he was chatting with one of her neighbors, as he often did. She looked out the peephole on her front door to see who he was speaking with, but she did not see a friendly face. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar African-American man dressed in black with a gun pointed on her husband. Minerva ran for her phone to call 911, but she heard a gunshot from outside before she could even reach it. Cesar passed away an hour later. He died 16 days short of his 36th birthday. The Torralbas received an outpouring of support from their community following the murder. The Guardian Angels, the nonprofit community safety patrol, came to Asbury Park to pass out flyers looking for information. 3 weeks after Cesar was killed, more than 150 people marched in Asbury Park to protest the violence in their community. Despite these community efforts, no suspect was ever identified. Minerva Torralba continues to speak to the media and pressure local authorities to stay focused on the case, hoping that one day she will be able to get justice for her late husband. Tara Tracy loved Christmas. The 25-year-old married mother of 4 was known to put up her Christmas tree in October so she could savor the season for longer. Tragically, in 1999, she would not get to see her favorite holiday. Tara spent December 23, 1999, celebrating her son Paul's 7th birthday. She then went to work her overnight shift at the Pantry, a convenience store directly across the street from her home. Tara enjoyed her job because it allowed her to be at home with her children during the day while her husband was at work, and she did not have to worry about transportation to get there. A family friend saw Tara at the store at 3:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve. At 4:20 a.m., a bread delivery man arrived at the store. He found Tara bleeding badly behind the counter and the store in disarray. Tara was rushed to the hospital but died soon after she arrived. She had been stabbed multiple times, and defensive wounds on her hands showed that she fought her attacker fiercely. The cash register had been knocked over, and some cash, less than $50, and some cigarettes were missing from the store. While robbery would be an obvious motive in the murder, certain details make those close to the case believe there was a more personal motive at play. The instrument used to stab Tara has been described by the police as unique. They have never publicly identified what it was to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. They have stated, however, that it is something that a robber would not normally bring with them to commit a robbery. Tara's family also believes that she knew her killer because her keys were found in the door, meaning she let the assailant into the store, which she would not have done for a stranger while she was alone at night. Tara's husband moved their children away almost immediately after the murder, not being able to cope with living so close to the scene of the crime. Tara's mother, Janice Hamilton, lost her other daughter, Nikki, just 17 months after losing Tara when she was killed by a drunk driver. On Memorial Day, the Pantry is now a BP station, and Tara's home was eventually demolished. A CVS now stands in its place. Police say they have persons of interest in Tara's case, but the case remains stalled. Nick J. Triant, 82, and his 74-year-old wife, Dimitra, were originally from Greece. They had owned and run a hotel in Wisconsin but had retired to the warmer climate of Clearwater, Florida. They liked to drive to the beach at dusk and spend hours watching the waves roll in with friends from the local Greek community. On Christmas Eve of 1968, a neighbor of the couple's knocked on their door. They had Christmas presents to deliver. The neighbor did not receive an answer, so they peered into the house through the front window. At first, the view was festive. The lights on the couple's Christmas tree were blinking, and a pile of Christmas cookies were on a tray on the kitchen counter. Then the neighbor noticed the terrible scene on the living room floor. Both Dimitra and Nick lying on the floor, both in their pajamas. They had both been beaten about the head. Dimitra was dead by the time police arrived. Nick was alive but barely clinging to consciousness. He was able to speak but was reportedly rambling incoherently. He managed to cling to life for 3 more days in the hospital before finally passing away due to his injuries. There had been a recent robbery in the neighborhood and several items were missing from the couple's ransacked home, leading police to believe that the couple had been killed after interrupting a burglary. The couple did not have a lot of money, so the killer would have only gotten a few pieces of jewelry in exchange for the lives of the couple. There were no witnesses to the crime, leaving police only known burglars to interview. They quickly ran out of leads to follow. The couple's granddaughter, Nikki, has continued to stay in contact with police in the 50 years since the murders, spurring them to continue trying to solve the case. Normally, she and her mother and brother would have been at Clearwater visiting her grandparents for Christmas on the day they were murdered, but Nikki, 18 and 1968, had returned from college with the flu, causing the trip to be postponed that year. Police continue to submit evidence from the scene for a forensic examination, hoping that advances in technology will help identify whoever killed the couple, but their efforts have yet to make such an identification. Randall Brown was 47 years old and lived in Clearwater, Florida. He was employed as a flight instructor. On Christmas Eve of 1973, he failed to arrive at work, which was out of character for him. His employer called the police. When they arrived at Randall's 8th floor apartment at 9 a.m., they immediately knew something was amiss due to the state of the apartment. They discovered Randall's body inside of a closet. He had been shot and suffered blunt force trauma. Despite the disarray at the scene, police found no signs of forced entry, implying that Randall had willingly let his killer into his apartment. Randall was active in the local bar scene, so he may have met someone while he was out and brought them home. Randall was also openly gay and had dealt with issues in the past with individuals who were hostile towards this aspect of his identity. Police had a lot of luck collecting evidence early on in their investigation. They found fingerprints at the crime scene and found Randall's car on Mandalay Avenue. The car was still in Clearwater but was on a different island that was part of the city than Randall's apartment. Investigators also learned that Randall's credit cards had been found in the early hours of the morning by a police officer near a dumpster in St. Petersburg, Florida, 20 miles south of Clearwater. The fingerprints had never been matched in any database, and police found no witnesses in either Clearwater or St. Petersburg. Randall's case went cold. In 2013, the Clearwater police spoke to the local media about Randall's case, along with the Jitrans, in hopes that their shared date of Christmas Eve would increase interest in the case and encourage individuals with information about them to come forward. The effort was unsuccessful, but Clearwater police continued to investigate both cases. Arguably the biggest true crime news story of 2018 was the arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo, who was identified by authorities as the infamous Golden State Killer. Authorities in California have charged him with 8 counts of murder and 13 kidnappings to commit robbery in place of rape charges, as the statute of limitations on such crimes has expired. These charges represent only a small fraction of the violent crimes the Golden State Killer between 1974 and 1986. DeAngelo has not yet gone to trial or been convicted of any of these charges. The apprehension of such a prolific criminal was obviously a major cause for celebration, but part of the notoriety of DeAngelo's arrest comes from the method used to identify him. DeAngelo was arrested after being identified through forensic genealogy in the first public case of this technique being used. A sample from a Golden State Killer crime scene had been uploaded to a relatively unknown genetic genealogy website and had identified a distant relative of the contributor of the DNA. Through creating extensive family trees, genealogists were able to identify suspects who would theoretically share that same percentage of DNA with the individual found in the database. They were able to collect DeAngelo's DNA based on that information, first covertly and then in a controlled setting, and tested it to confirm that it matches the sample found at the crime scene. The website these authorities used is known as GEDmatch, and as of the making of this video, it has been used to make arrests in 15 murders and sexual assaults. Several of these arrests were made in very high-profile cold cases, including those of April Tinsley, Michaela Welsh, Jay Cook, and Tanya Van Kielenberg. It has also been used to identify the remains of 6 John and Jane Does. While the use of genetic genealogy to solve crimes is still a novel approach, GEDmatch itself has been around for almost a decade and has very humble and personal origins. Curtis Rogers was a businessman who had a lifelong interest in his family history. He began studying genealogy in earnest and had his DNA tested with a desire to verify his family's belief that they were related to Thomas Rogers, a passenger on the Mayflower in 1620. Through Curtis's research, he learned that they were not. However, this did not diminish his interest in genealogy and the role genetic research could play in it. He became an administrator for the Rogers Surname Project on Family Tree DNA, the commercial service he had used to obtain his DNA sequence. His experience on Family Tree DNA made Curtis wonder if it would be possible to create a computer program to quickly do the work of constructing elaborate family trees that was at the time still so cumbersome, even with the aid of DNA. Another member of the Rogers Surname Project recommended that Curtis speak to a man named John Olson. Olson was a transportation engineer who, while he had no real interest in genealogy, was fascinated by the idea of using computer code to mathematically compare and map DNA sequences. Despite living 1,000 miles apart, John and Curtis worked together to develop the program specifically for the Rogers Surname Project. In 2010, they decided to open up the project to anyone with an interest in genetic genealogy, and GEDmatch was born. The name GEDmatch is a reference to GEDCOM files, which were developed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to organize genealogical data in a single plain text file. Due to their specific beliefs about family and the afterlife, Latter-day Saints have a particular interest in identifying their extended relatives. They therefore have played a major part in developing databases and techniques used in genealogical research. While GEDmatch is in no way affiliated with the church, it has benefited from and still uses some of their research, including GEDCOM files. The actual GEDmatch site is fairly basic. Since the site is an open-source research tool, not a for-profit venture, the two-man crew running it is more concerned with keeping up its technical accuracy than making it look until the site's recent notoriety. It was basically a hobby project for Olson and Rogers even after Rogers retired from working full-time. While the site was created to be a public resource and never intended to make Rogers and Olson a lot of money, it still does have financial concerns. The cost of the servers needed to run a site with so much data uploaded to it has been estimated to be close to $250,000 a year. To cover these costs, GEDmatch offers what they call a Tier 1 membership. For $10 a month, Tier 1 members gain access to extra, more specialized tools. This keeps the more general tools and search features that the average person would need free to use. This background and research is what makes GEDmatch both unique and accessible to law enforcement. For individuals who are doing their own genetic research, the site gives them a chance to amongst customers of different commercial DNA sites. For example, if someone chooses to use an Ancestry.com test kit, they will only see familial matches from people who have also used Ancestry.com. However, once they upload their raw data to GEDmatch, they have the potential to find relatives who chose to use sites like 23andMe or Family Tree DNA. Since the site is open source and individuals who upload data to it are voluntarily allowing it to be compared to other samples, this also means that law enforcement can utilize it to find genetic relatives of individuals who have left DNA at crime scenes. The companies that actually provide the DNA testing, like 23andMe, do not allow such access to their data as their customers have not consented to their DNA being used in such a way. It should be noted that despite public perception, uploading your DNA to GEDmatch does not give anyone, including law enforcement, access to it. GEDmatch analyzes similarities between samples and reports back this degree of similarity. When law enforcement runs a DNA profile through GEDmatch, they are shown a table of other samples sorted by the amount of DNA shared with that sample and a numeric estimation of the number of generations separating the two contributors of those samples. Users begin diverting from GEDmatch's intended use as a purely genealogical tool almost immediately. A popular use for genetic genealogy is helping adopted children identify their biological parents. While this is technically genetic genealogical research, it has the potential to reveal unknown or unwanted family information and therefore has its own set of ethical concerns. The question of using the database to solve crimes is obviously much more loaded and has a far greater number of potential legal and ethical problems. This is why the relationship between GEDmatch and law enforcement has been somewhat rocky. Prior to D'Angelo's arrest, the terms of service for the site were vague enough that uploading DNA for the purpose of investigating a crime did not violate them, but Curtis Rogers did not want to actively encourage such a use. In the past, he had been contacted by both Parabon Nanolabs, a forensics firm that has been involved with many of the major cases recently solved by forensic genealogy, and the DNA Doe Project, which is attempting to use DNA to identify John and Jane Does. In both cases, Rogers told them that while he could not stop them from using GEDmatch for their specific purposes, he refused to endorse it. Rogers and Olson were not made aware that GEDmatch was being used in the Golden State Killer case prior to the announcement of D'Angelo's arrest. Rogers was initially upset that the site had been used in this way and without his knowledge, but the public reaction to the news slowly changed his mind. 4 days after D'Angelo's initial set of charges were announced, Rogers posted an announcement on GEDmatch highlighting the fact that using DNA to identify criminals did not technically violate the site's terms of service and inviting users to delete their information if they did not want it to be used in such a way. Rogers feared a massive wave of backlash following D'Angelo's arrest and was surprised when he was instead overwhelmed with positive feedback. There were of course some individuals who accused him of violating people's privacy, but the overwhelming majority of emails Rogers received about the news were congratulatory. Some individuals did choose to remove their information from the database, but that number paled in comparison to the number of new profiles that were uploaded. Immediately after the announcement of D'Angelo's arrest, GEDmatch had over 5,000 new profiles uploaded to it and broke its record for number of profiles added in a single day. It is impossible to know if this influx came because people simply had never heard of the site before and wanted to use it for their own genealogical research, or if they actively wanted their DNA to be used to help catch criminals. It does show, however, that plenty of people did not object to their data being used for such a purpose. Rogers subsequently updated the terms of service for GEDmatch in May 2018. They now specifically allow law enforcement officials to upload a DNA profile for the purpose of either identifying a criminal who committed a violent crime or identifying a deceased individual. GEDmatch considers a violent crime to be either a homicide or a sexual assault. Even if most people do not wish to have their DNA used in criminal investigations, only a relatively small number of willing participants are needed to be able to identify a huge percentage of the population. Since it is more of an obscure site with features mainly for people who have more than a passing interest in genealogy, GEDmatch has only approximately 1 million DNA files uploaded to it. This is in comparison to the estimated 5 million files on 23andMe and 10 million on Ancestry.com. All of the suspects who have been arrested using forensic genealogy have been identified using only this relatively small sample. This is not necessarily a surprising fact. According to an article published in the journal Science, over 60% of Americans of Northern European descent are currently able to be identified through their relatives with the samples already uploaded to GEDmatch. They estimate that this percentage will rise to over 90% within 3 years. This is due to how distantly two people can be related and still share a detectable amount of shared DNA. In the Golden State Killer case, for example, D'Angelo was identified through his fifth cousin, someone with whom his most recent common ancestor was one of his great-great-grandparents. Assuming every person in a family tree has 2 or 3 children, an individual in that family can expect to have 4,700 fifth cousins. Now, relatives more distant than third cousins only theoretically share a small enough amount of DNA that they are not guaranteed to have any shared DNA at all. Out of those 4,700 fifth cousins, a 2012 study has estimated that only about 700 of them would be identifiable through DNA. Even with this limitation, 1 million samples still has a very far reach into the general population. This video is purely an overview of GEDmatch and forensic genealogy. There are of course a wide range of ethical concerns that go along with this practice, and I have deliberately left out major issues like privacy and race, as each of these topics alone would probably require multiple videos to address them properly. However, unless a major court case strikes the practice down, forensic genealogy will probably continue to increase in prominence in the American justice system. As the response to GEDmatch itself after D'Angelo's arrest shows, transparency in the use of the site to solve crimes and make identifications is crucial. Educating the public about this practice and letting them make their own informed decisions about how they want to use their DNA is a basic but essential part of forensic genealogy. Henry Burinski was born in Poland in 1911 and as an adult became a Roman Catholic priest. In the chaos of World War II, he was forced to leave the country of his birth. He became a teacher, working for a time in Africa. He then enlisted in the military, serving with the Polish Second Corps for the remainder of the war. He stayed with them after the war ended and arrived with them in England in 1946. He was discharged from his military service in 1949 and remained in the United Kingdom. In October of 1952, he was appointed chaplain of the Polish community in the city of Bradford in West Yorkshire. At the time, Bradford was home to a large number of refugees from Central and Eastern Europe who had come to the UK to escape the communist governments which had come to power in their home countries. The refugee population of the city at the time has been estimated to be around 6,000, with approximately 1,500 of them being Polish, like Burinski. Father Burinski's appointment was not without controversy. He was sent to replace Canon Borislav Martinellis, a 58-year-old priest from Lithuania who had been one of the first refugees to arrive in West Yorkshire after World War II. He had been the first priest to serve the majority of the refugees who arrived in England after him in their new country. Martin Ellis resented Father Burinski being sent to take over his congregation, and so he refused to leave Bradford. He continued to say Mass for the small Lithuanian community in the city who still supported him. Father Burinski had offered to share duties with Canon Martin Ellis to appease his predecessor, but Martin Ellis refused the offer. While Martin Ellis had supporters who stayed loyal to him even after Father Burinski arrived in Bradford, Father Burinski was quickly embraced and beloved by the majority of the people he had been sent to serve. While Martin Ellis was Lithuanian, he was ethnically Polish and spoke the Polish language, which was one of the reasons he had been assigned to minister to the Polish population in Bradford in the first place. Some of the Poles in Bradford may have supported Father Burinski because he was actually from their native country and had a strong sense of Polish pride. It seems more likely, however, that he received the overwhelming support he had due to his vibrant personality. Canon Martin Lees is generally referred to as being cold and dour. Father Burinski, on the other hand, was a dynamic preacher who genuinely enjoyed spending time with his parishioners and took an active interest in them and their daily lives. He was proud of his Polish heritage, and his sense of nationalism inspired his refugee parishioners whose sense of pride in the land of their birth had been beaten down by war, oppression, and exile. On July 13, 1953, Father Burinski arrived at the door of Canon Martinella's home. When the canon asked him what he was doing there, Father Burinski told him that he had just received a phone call from someone claiming to be speaking on Canon Martinella's behalf. The caller had asked him to come see Canon Martinella's right away. Martinellis told Burinski that he had not asked anyone to make such a call, and Burinski left. Around 7 p.m. that same night, Burinski answered another phone call at his residence at 82 Little Horton Lane. His landlady, Irina Beck, saw him answer the phone and took note of it because he was behaving strangely. Father Burinski, who was usually gregarious and pleasant, was speaking in short, clipped sentences. He seemed tense and secretive and cupped his hand over the receiver of the phone, so as to keep Irina or her husband from overhearing the conversation he was having in Polish. His strange demeanor worried Mrs. Beck. The last thing Mrs. Beck heard Father Burinski say before he hung up the phone was, "Okay, I'll go," in Polish. Father Burinski took his hat and heavy coat, which he should not have needed in the middle of summer, and left the house. He left behind his wallet and his identification papers. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the priest. There is, however, a second-hand report of him running into a parishioner outside of St. Luke's Hospital after he left his lodging. He reportedly told the parishioner that he did not have time to talk because he was off to play detective. Father Burinski's disappearance devastated the members of his parish. The Polish community anxiously looked for opportunities to help in the search for their beloved priest. They feared that foul play was the only thing that could have taken Father Burinski from them, and rumors spread throughout Bradford about who could have harmed him. The first and most obvious suspect was Father Burinski's predecessor, Canon Boleslaw. After Father Burinski went missing, Canon Martin Ellis downplayed his resentment of him. He claimed to the police that he had not been dismissed from his parish, but had rather resigned due to health problems and as such had no motive to harm Father Burinski. This account of him leaving the parish has been widely discredited. As he also pointed out in his interview with police, however, it does seem unlikely that Canon Martin Ellis have been directly involved in Father Burinski's disappearance and presumed death due to his physical condition. Father Burinski was 16 years younger than Canon Martin Ellis. While at 58, Canon Martin Ellis certainly wasn't ancient, he would probably be more frail than the 42-year-old Father Berensky. Father Berensky was also known for his particularly solid stature. Standing around 6 feet tall and approximately 200 pounds, he would have been difficult for the more slight Canon Martin Ellis to physically overpower, even if the two men had been the same age. There was also a fear that Cold War politics may have caused Father Berensky to meet with foul play. Father Berensky was an outspoken opponent of communism and frequently preached against it in his homilies. In October 1952, he was part of a group of priests who organized a protest against harassment from agents of the Soviet embassy in London, in Bradford, and the Yorkshire area at large. Refugees from countries behind the Iron Curtain had reported being visited in their homes at night by individuals trying to pressure them into returning to their homelands. Others claimed to have received letters that politely asked them to return, but also contained veiled threats about what would happen to their family members who had not been able to escape to England with them if they did not. There were widespread reports of a ring of KGB agents operating in and surveilling Bradford at the time. Fear and paranoia were prevalent in Bradford. Emboldening the community and speaking out against communism were not unique to Father Berensky, however. As communism was hostile to religion, the communist governments of Eastern and Central Europe persecuted both the church and its clergy. This meant that every priest in the West was opposed to communism, at least in theory, and plenty of them preached against it. Father Berensky would not be worth attacking for foreign agents purely for his protests against communist governments. If he were abducted or killed by foreign agents, it would presumably have to have been because he stumbled upon some sort of specific information about the espionage going on in Bradford, which he potentially could have if he really were playing detective when he left his home on July 13th. Soviet involvement in Father Berensky's disappearance seemed to be confirmed in 1962. Bohdan Stashinsky, a KGB officer and assassin who had defected to the West in 1961, claimed to have assassinated Father Berensky using cyanide under orders from Moscow, and then buried his body on the Ilkley Moor. 3,000 people from Bradford volunteered to search the moor should Stashinsky's story be confirmed. The story, while it sounded promising, quickly proved untrue. Stashinsky had been in Kiev for training at the time Father Berensky went missing, and he was not trained to use cyanide for assassinations until 1957, for years after Berensky's disappearance. Police did search the moor but found nothing linked to the case. It is also possible that both espionage and professional jealousy resulted in Father Berensky going missing. Bob Taylor, a retired police officer who re-examined police evidence in the case, alleged on a BBC television show in 2003 that Father Berensky had been murdered by the Polish secret police. He further claimed that Canon Martin Ellis had been involved in the plot to have him killed. He did concede that Martin Ellis may not have wanted Father Berensky dead. Rather, he may have been coerced into helping to get Father Berensky by being told that he was only going to be abducted and that he would have his old position back in his rival's absence. Canon Martin Ellis's involvement, Taylor claims, was covered up by the Catholic Church. Canon Martin Ellis willingly working for communists does seem unlikely. He had survived 18 months in a Soviet prison camp during the Second World War and had himself fled to England to escape the expanding reach of communism. That being said, his anger at being replaced could have been used against him, and his desire to have this wrong being righted may have blinded him to what he was really getting into. It is certainly plausible that he may have been pulled into a plot against Father Berensky with a promise that he could be reinstated to his previous position, not understanding who he was really working with, or even what they were really planning to do to Father Berensky. He may not have grasped the reality of what was going to happen to Father Berensky until after he was already gone. Canon Martin Ellis may also have gotten a sense that something terrible was going to happen at the last minute and made an attempt to save his rival. It is possible that the first phone call Father Berensky received on July 13th was meant to be the original lure to whatever fate ultimately became of him. If Canon Martin Ellis did have the phone call summoning Father Berensky to his home made on behalf of the people he was working with, he may have lied about it. Once he was faced with Father Berensky, Canon Martin Ellis may have sent the younger priest away, claiming to have never asked for such a call to be made in an attempt to save Berensky from the plot against him. While we know Canon Martin Ellis resented Father Berensky for replacing him, we have no evidence that he would go so far as to want the fellow priest to be murdered. Even if Canon Martin Ellis was not involved with the plot against Father Berensky himself, that does not mean that he did not know what happened to him. He could have been made aware of what happened to his rival in confession. In the Catholic Church, individuals can confess their sins to a priest and receive absolution for them. Priests are absolutely forbidden to reveal anything told to them during confession. And betraying the confidence of someone seeking penance is one of the worst things a priest could do in the eyes of the Church. A priest will be subject to excommunication for doing such a thing. If someone confessed to Canon Martin Ellis that they played a part in the death of Father Berensky during the sacrament of penance, he would be unable to do anything about it due to his religious beliefs. A less popular theory of whom may have made Father Berensky disappear holds that he was killed by one of Canon Martin Ellis's supporters in Bradford. While Canon Martin Ellis was nowhere near as charismatic as Father Berensky, he did have parishioners who were loyal to him in the Lithuanian community. If someone confessed to him that they had killed Father Berensky in an ill-advised attempt at helping Canon Martin Ellis get his old position back, he could not share that information, and quite possibly felt guilt over being the reason behind another man's murder. Since he could not reveal the crime and felt some sense of responsibility for it, he may have also helped cover it up after the fact. Martin Ellis purchased 60 pounds of caustic soda around the time Father Berensky went missing. The purpose of this purchase was never determined. Speculate that this amount of caustic soda could have been used to dissolve a body buried underground in a matter of weeks. It is possible that Canon Martin Ellis acquired the caustic soda to help Father Berensky's killer dispose of his body. The idea that Martin Ellis had information about Father Berensky's fate, whether because he had been involved in bringing it about or just learned of it after the fact, is supported by the apparent decline in his mental status after Father Berensky went missing. 3 weeks after Father Berensky's disappearance, Canon Martin Ellis was found collapsed in his study. On his desk, the phrase, "Keep silent, priest," in Polish had been spelled out using matchsticks to form the letters. Martin Ellis told his niece that 2 men had come to his door to speak with him and he had invited them into the study. He then felt a sharp pain on the back of his head and could remember nothing after that. A neighbor who had helped get the canon out of the house and to the hospital told the newspaper that he had seen a large bruise on the back of his head. Police were skeptical about Canon Martin Ellis' story from the very beginning. The canon did eventually call the account into question himself as well. Accounts vary, but the canon either told the police that it never happened or that it was possible that he'd imagined it. If the attack never occurred, this would mean that the ominous matchstick message would have been a warning he was trying to get across to himself. In either case, the incident certainly does not indicate that Canon Martin Ellis' mind was at ease in the aftermath of Father Berensky going missing. Canon Martin Ellis did not have to live with this mental stress for very long. He died of a heart attack in 1955, just 2 years after Father Berensky vanished. The shadow of Father Berensky's disappearance was so dark on Canon Martin Ellis' reputation that the Bishop of Leeds, John Heenan, had to address the rumors of Martin Ellis' involvement in the case during his funeral mass. He assured the congregation that the idea of Canon Martin Ellis being involved in harming another priest was absurd. He did concede, however, that the canon's mind had been troubled ever since Father Berensky disappeared. In the years since Father Berensky went missing, the threat of Soviet spies has been lifted from the Polish community in Bradford, but not the desire for answers about what became of their beloved chaplain. While Father Berensky may not be in Bradford anymore, his reputation certainly lives on. His congregates raised their children on tales of the great priest who was mysteriously taken from them too soon. Joey Labue Jr. was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1989. Quiet and reserved even as an infant, he grew into an observant and quick-witted adult who was somewhat of a homebody. He graduated from Ohio State University in 2011 with a degree in financial planning. He took a job at Morgan Stanley and was living outside of Columbus, Ohio in 2016. On March 4th of that year, Joey was persuaded to ditch his usual Friday night routine of Netflix and video games to go out to the Union Cafe, a popular bar on High Street in Columbus Short North District with his cousin Stacy and her husband Kyle. The bar was unusually crowded that night because it was the weekend of the Arnold Sports Festival, an annual event that over 100,000 people travel to Columbus for. Like many people, Joey became more relaxed and social. After having a few drinks, Joey, Stacy, and Kyle were based at a table in the bar, but Joey spent most of the evening moving throughout the Union, talking to different acquaintances and dancing. After midnight, Stacy began to feel ill and wanted to leave. She could not find Joey, so she called and texted him. Joey did not answer, which was unusual for him. Hoping that Joey had decided to spend the night at the apartment of a friend who lived close to the bar, Stacy and Kyle went home. Stacy continued calling and texting her cousin until 2:30 in the morning but never got any response. While Joey never responded to Stacy, his phone did send out one final text message after he was last seen at the Union. However, this message only deepened the mystery of what happened to him. At 1:22 a.m. on March 5th, Joey's phone sent out a one-word text message to one of his friends. The seemingly random string of letters has never been definitively found to have any sort of meaning. Joey's and his guess that it may have been Joey's inebriated attempt to say Jonestown, the town where she worked and had mentioned earlier in the night when she had been texting Joey. A massive effort to find Joey began the Sunday after he was last seen. His family held vigils, and businesses up and down High Street displayed missing persons flyers. Local television stations covered the story and Joey's picture was shared through social media. Grainy security footage turned over to the police by the Union showed Joey walking towards the bar's exit without his coat despite the cold temperatures that night. His car was still where Joey had parked it in the lot of the apartment complex he had previously lived in with his ex-boyfriend. His bank accounts were not accessed. His cell phone remained active for approximately 2 hours after he was last seen, and GPS showed that he had remained in the general area of the short north. 2 weeks after Joey went missing on March 29th, his body was discovered in the Scioto River, several feet from the shore, caught on some debris. While Joey's family finally knew where he was, the discovery of his body added even more layers of mystery to the case. Showed no outward signs of trauma, and the only drugs in his system were alcohol and caffeine. It would be easy to assume that Joey had either committed suicide or drunkenly fallen into the river by accident, but further examination of his body ruled these options out. There was no water found in Joey's lungs, which the coroner's office stated means that Joey was almost certainly dead before he was put into the water. The coroner's office was unable to determine Joey's cause of death. Suicide has been ruled out and Joey's death was ruled broadly as a suspicious death. Police continue to investigate the case. As of now, however, both the cause of Joey's death and the identity or identities of those involved in it remain unknown.